All right. Now, after API, let's move to the main .NET MAUI Blazor hybrid application. The first thing I'm going to set the API connectivity thing, then we'll work on designing the thing. All right. So for that, we are going to use Refit client using refit.http client factory. So in fresh wage card, this main .NET MAUI project, I'm going to add a NuGet package, refit.http client factory. It makes our life easier to connect to APIs, basically for HTTP client calls. All right, so it is installed. Now we just need to configure it. Okay. So in order to configure how Refit works, we need to have interfaces, and then Refit is going to generate the code or the implementation of those interfaces, and that generated code will take care of uh, serializing and deserializing request and response, sending the request to the API, fetching the response, parsing it, handling errors, all these things. It takes care of all these things. What we need to do, we need to have our API interfaces. So in this Maui project only, I'll create a folder APIs. Inside this, we need to create interfaces. Okay. So whatever APIs we have I product API, so public interface, and in this we just need to tell it what type of request and response this call is going to have. Okay. So for example, we know for product API, we are going to have one method get products async. It will not have any parameter, and it is going to return us task of product DTO array of it, right? Right now, this is a normal interface. We need to tell it that this is going to be a Refit interface. We need to define the HTTP verb here. So this is going to be a get method. And inside this, we need to provide the URL for this. The URL is going to be slash API slash products. This is what we have in our API. If you go to API endpoints, product endpoint, this is what we have, right? And it returns product DTO array, task of product DTO array. Save it. Okay, good. Let's use this iProduct API interface in our MAUI program. Here now we'll add other interfaces. Before that, we'll go to MAUI program. Here we are going to configure Refit client. So for this, what I am going to do, I am simply going to create a method here, a private void configure Refit. Here we are going to simply get iService collection services. All right. And let's call this before this builder.build. So we'll say configure Refit, and this needs to be static. Configure Refit, and we'll simply provide builder.services as a parameter. Now we'll work inside this method only. Okay. So first thing, we need our API URL. For base API URL, we need. Now for this, we are going to test our app on physical device. So right now, if I use whatever I am having in my API, so in API properties, launch settings, this is the URL, right? Localhost, port is 7089. So this will just work for Windows out of the box, and for other platforms, for Android, we need to set up custom HTTP message handler and all that stuff. I'm going to avoid all those stuff. But for you, if you guys want to know about this, how to work with localhost APIs, I already have a couple of videos on my channel. Okay, so on my channel only in playlist, if you go here, you should see something connect .NET MAUI API to localhost. API. So I have these four parts here. So you can follow these to understand how these things will work. But for this video, I'm not going to use localhost. Rather, I'll use dev tunnel. So dev tunnel, it is actually a kind of a public URL. Okay. And the good thing about this is we will run our API locally using localhost, but then dev tunnel will create a global URL for this. And the good thing is we can debug our code. We can put a breakpoint. The request will go to the dev tunnel URL, and from the dev tunnel URL, request will come to our localhost API. We can access the dev tunnel URL from anywhere. That is what we are going to use. Okay, so I'm going to set up this. Before that, let's get this to work. Then I'm going to set up that and going to change this base API. Right now, here we'll say services.add refit client. We have this method. In here, we can provide this T, which is type of our interface. So we have I product API. This is our interface. This is the basic simplest form. Now we need to use this base API URL because if we go to I product API, this interface, we have slash API slash products. But before this slash API, we need to have some domain authority, right? Localhost port and all those things. So those we will configure here. So after this add Refit client, we have one method here that is configure HTTP client. And inside this configure HTTP client, it takes action of HTTP client, action delegate, which has a HTTP client parameter. We'll say HTTP client, we can access this. On this, we can simply say HTTP client dot base address equals new URI is base API URL. Now this is done. Now this thing we are going to repeat it for all our APIs, auth, order, product, user, all. So I'm going to create a helper method here. A static, let's say set HTTP client, something like this. We'll get HTTP client is a parameter here. We provide HTTP client HTTP client, and then we'll simply set this thing. Base API URL, we need to set this, so we can simply have it as const string. Here in this configure HTTP client, we'll simply say set HTTP client, and we are good. Now it will work for iProduct API, but we need others as well. So before going to others, let's set up the, or maybe let's set the other APIs, then we'll set dev tunnel. Okay. All right. So let's go to iProduct API. After this, I'm going to define one more interface, and this time let's have auth endpoints. We'll say I auth API. Inside this, if you see this method, whatever we have in our services, these are kind of same, right? If you go to services, we have auth service. In auth API, we are going to have login and register, these two methods, right? Let's have these. First, we are going to have this register async method here. Then we are going to have login async method. Now these names can be different, no problem here. The main thing is type of request and response and these attributes get post with the proper URLs. So this is a post method, and the same login is also a post method. The URL is api/auth/login. Same thing for this register, we have /api/auth/register, right? This we can verify from auth endpoints. We have api/auth/register, api/auth/login. So our iauth API is ready. Let's move it to separate file. After this, we have public interface in interface I order API. Then we are going to have public interface I user API. Okay. In order API, let's check what we have in our order service. First, we are going to have place order, this request. Now, in this place order, we don't need user ID from here because it will be provided by our authentication mechanism, right? We will provide the JWT token, and from there, our API is going to fetch the user ID. We'll remove this. After placing the order, we have get user orders. Let's have this thing. Then we have this one, get user order item system, like this. All right. Now let's see what uh, type of method these are. That means the API endpoint and get post HTTP verb. We'll go to order endpoints. First, this is the main URL prefix for all. Place order. This is a post request which we can see here, map post. The URL is going to be start from this API/orders. Let me copy this thing. Add with both of these as well. API/order, API/order. Now both of these, user order and order item, these are get request, not post. So get and get. And for place order, we have /place order. And for this one, what is the get user items, user orders? We have this thing. Then we have for user order items, we have this thing. Let's copy this URL and paste it. Now for these Refit attributes, get, put, post, delete, all these, it does not allow these route constraints. So colon int, it will not work. So we need to remove this. The dynamic parameter will be there, but this constraint colon type, this is not going to be there. With this, we are done with the I order API as well. Now we have I user API. For this, let's see what we have in user service. First, we have save address async. User ID will be provided by the token. We'll remove this. Then we have get addresses of the user. Again, we'll remove user ID. It will be provided by the token. Then we have change password. From here also, we are going to remove this int user ID. First one will be post. Second one will be get. And this change password, this is also a post. We have all these attributes: post, get, delete, put, patch, options. We have all. Because whatever you have defined in our API, you can use that HTTP verb here. Let's get the URLs. We'll go to user endpoints. Base is /API/user. Have it here only. Slash. For save address, we have addresses. Cool. Get address also, we have same addresses. Then change password, we just have /change password. Save it. Move this iUser API to a separate file. And now we are good. Now, if we go to our endpoints, auth endpoint, this is fine. Product endpoint is fine. But if you see order endpoint and user endpoint, we have this require authorization. We have this require authorization. So we need to have authorization and authentication for these endpoints. That means in our mobile app, for iOrder API and iUser API, we need authentication authorization for these. For this, we need to provide a pass our JWT token with each and every request. That means for these three requests, and in iOrder API, these four requests, three requests, we need to pass the JWT token which we should have stored somewhere in our mobile app. Okay. For this, using Refit, what we do on these interfaces, we can define an attribute that is the headers attribute. Inside this, we can say authorization. This is the header name. Value would be bearer space and then token. The token will be added by Refit automatically. We will just set this that all these requests will use a header, authorization header with the value of bearer and then some value. Same thing we'll do with users API. Okay. From where this value will be provided, this also we need to tell Refit from where you will get this value. Okay, so that will do. Before that, let's go to MAUI program and let's set up all these other interfaces. Make a duplicate registration, iProduct API, then we have iAuth API, then we have iOrder API, then we have iUser API. First two are fine without anything. These will work, but for these two, we need to tell from where we will get the authorization header value. Okay. For this, we can configure something. Something is going to be, if we see in this add refit client, this method, we have a refit settings. And we have one more overload of this, which is this func of iService provider refit setting. So this is a func delegate which gets iService provider as an input and returns refit settings. We are going to use this one. For this, because this is going to be used multiple times, so we can simply create a method here, static void. Now it should not be void because what we need method which should return refit settings. Okay, so here say get refit settings and it gets iService provider as a, call it SP as a parameter. From here we'll simply create refit settings and we'll return refit settings. Get refit settings, this we can directly add to iUser API and iOrder API. Now this is default, nothing changed. This is the same default behavior. Now with this settings, we need to set something, and that something is going to be in this settings. We have authorization header value getter. This is the thing from where these header attributes are going to get value from. We need to provide something here. Now this thing is actually a delegate, func delegate. It gets HTTP request message cancellation token as a parameter and returns task of string as output as the return type. So we don't want to use HTTP request message cancellation token, so we can simply omit these. I'm using discard operators underscore underscore. From here, we just need to return task dot from result, and from here we will simply token. Okay. Now this token, we need to get these tokens from somewhere. We are going to modify this piece of code when we will have our login system in place. Then we'll get this dynamically from somewhere. All right. Now we are good. We have configured our Refit settings. It should work. We just need to change this thing. Let's quickly do this. So instead of having this localhost API, I am going to use dev tunnel. So for dev tunnels, what we need to do first, we'll select API project as a startup project. So right click, set as startup project, or you can select it from here. Then here where we have this HTTPS, we'll go here and here we have an option of dev tunnels. Okay. Here we'll create a tunnel. You can create this dev tunnel using the command line as well. You can read about this thing. Some name, fresh veg cart YT. This name is up to you. You can name it whatever you want. this tunnel type temporary or persistent. So I'm having this persistent, so that what happens if we set temporary, if we close Visual Studio, open it again, it goes away. That is not what I want, because this recording, this project creation, it can span to multiple days, and I can close the Visual Studio and open it again. So I will not create new dev tunnel, because whenever we create a dev tunnel, it creates a new URL. So we need to come here and change the URL. That is not what I want. That's why I'll have it persistent. Then access, I'm going to have public, so that we can access it from anywhere, from my mobile device or from my Mac or anywhere. Cool. Let's say okay. It will take some time, a very small amount of time, and it will create the dev tunnel. It will notify us that dev tunnel has been created. And it is created. Your dev tunnel has been successfully created and it's selected as the currently active tunnel. Now, this is the main thing. When we create it, by default, it selects the dev tunnel. But if it does not, you can simply go here, select dev tunnel, and select it. Now, whenever you will close the Visual Studio and open it again, the default this selection will go away. Whenever you are restarting the Visual Studio, you need to come here, select API project as startup, come here, select this HTTPS caret. Then from here, dev tunnel, you need to select this. Right? Now we'll see what is the URL for this. So let's quickly try to run the API. So it has started on this local host, and it should have started with the dev tunnel as well, but we can't see that URL right now. So let's see in the settings, in API project, in properties, launch settings, launch browser is false. Let's make it true, so that when we run this, it opens the browser. You can go here and you can select the view all dev tunnels or that option. So from there also you will be able to see the dev tunnel. So you see now, this is a dev tunnel URL, MAWW1PS0, something like this, and it ends with .devtunnels.ms. We need to continue from here, just continue, and we are okay. 404, because we have not added anything on root. Now we just need to copy this URL. This is a dev tunnel URL. Close it, and I'll go to MAUI program, and here where I have base API URL, I'm just going to paste this. It should end at devtunnels.ms. That's all. Should not copy anything after this. Save it. Now everything should work fine. Let's quickly verify if we are getting the data. So what we'll do, we'll quickly go to the base first components. In components, pages, home.razor. Here I'm going to simply inject I product API, and as you can see, Visual Studio started breaking out. So product API, I'm just going to have code block here, override on initialized async, await product API dot get products async var p equals this, or let's have these product TTO array products products equals blank array, and then in here we'll simply set these products to this one. On this page only, I'm simply going to have a UL, and let's have a for each var p in underscore products, and inside this just li p dot name at the rate p dot name. That's all. Save everything. Now we need to run API and UI both. For this we have a couple of options. One is we can set both of these to run together, or we can run API separately. So right click on the API project, debug, start without debugging, or maybe you can run this from command line. The API project, we'll run it and leave it. But that dev tunnel should be selected. So you see dev tunnel, yes, it is working. Now we will simply select our MAUI application and we are going to run it. Right now, let's try to run it on Windows only to just quickly check. It will take a while because we are starting it for the first time. Here we just need to see if the application is able to connect to the API, getting the data, fetching the response and all. Loading, hello, and we can see this. Avocado, beet, bell pepper, all these things. That means we are getting the data from the API. So looks like everything is fine. API is working, database connection is working, database seeding data worked. Then our mobile MAUI application, the Refit setting is working. Our mobile app is or Windows desktop app is able to make the call to the API, fetch the response, parse it, and all these things. So we are good. We have connected our API. Now we will start designing our app. Now actually UI work will start.